Imagine trusting someone with one of the most important moments of your life, the birth of your child. And then when that moment finally arrives, they're nowhere to be found. That's exactly where this case begins. A woman walks into the courtroom, clearly frustrated, clearly emotional, and more than anything, feeling completely let down. She's not just upset about money. She's upset about what she calls a betrayal. Because this isn't just about a service that went wrong. This is about a moment she can never get back. On the other side stands the midwife, calm, composed, and ready to defend herself. She doesn't see herself as irresponsible or negligent. In her mind, this situation has been blown way out of proportion. She believes she did nothing wrong, or at least nothing that justifies being sued. And right from the start, you can tell, this is not going to be a simple case. Judge Judy wastes no time. She wants clarity, and she wants it fast. What exactly was agreed upon? What were the expectations? And most importantly, what went wrong? The woman begins her story. She explains that she hired this midwife during her pregnancy, trusting her to be there during labor and delivery. This wasn't a last-minute arrangement. This was planned. There were conversations, agreements, and of course, payment involved. To her, this wasn't just hiring a professional. It was choosing someone to guide her through one of the most vulnerable and emotional experiences of her life. She talks about the reassurance she felt during her pregnancy. The midwife made her feel comfortable, confident, safe. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. Because when the time came, when labor actually started, the one person she was counting on simply didn't show up. And that's where everything changed. She describes the panic, the confusion, the stress of being in labor and suddenly realizing that the person who was supposed to be there wasn't answering calls, wasn't responding, wasn't available. Instead of feeling supported, she felt abandoned. And in that moment, she had no choice but to turn to someone else. Plans changed, expectations shattered, and what was supposed to be a controlled, supported experience turned into something chaotic and uncertain. As she tells her story, you can hear the emotion in her voice. This isn't just about inconvenience. This is about trust being broken at the worst possible time. Judge Judy listens carefully. But as always, she's not just interested in feelings. She wants facts. So she turns to the midwife. And this is where things start to get interesting. Because the midwife doesn't deny that she wasn't there. But her explanation? That's a completely different story. She claims there were circumstances, reasons beyond her control. She suggests that things didn't happen the way the woman is describing them. According to her, communication wasn't as clear as it should have been. There were misunderstandings, timing issues, and possibly even unrealistic expectations from the client. Right away, you can feel the tension rising. Two completely different versions of the same situation. One says, "You abandoned me when I needed you the most." The other says, "You're misrepresenting what actually happened." And now it's up to Judge Judy to figure out the truth. She starts asking direct questions. Were there clear terms agreed upon? Was the midwife on call? What exactly was she being paid for? Because in cases like this, everything comes down to expectations versus obligations. The woman insists that she paid for a service that was never delivered. In her mind, it's simple. She hired the midwife to be there during labor, and the midwife wasn't there. That's it. But the midwife pushes back. She implies that being a midwife isn't as straightforward as just showing up. There are schedules, limitations, and sometimes unpredictable situations. She suggests that she did what she could under the circumstances. Judge Judy doesn't seem convinced yet. She leans in, asking sharper questions, trying to cut through the noise. Because what she's really trying to understand is this. Was this a clear failure to fulfill a professional duty? Or was this a misunderstanding between two people with different expectations? And that's where the case starts to take shape. Because now it's not just about what happened. It's about what should have happened. The woman continues, explaining how much she relied on the midwife, how important it was for her to have that support. She emphasizes that this wasn't just any service. This was something deeply personal. And when that support disappeared, it didn't just affect the logistics of the delivery. It affected her emotionally. Judge Judy listens, but you can tell she's waiting for something more concrete. Proof, details, something that clearly shows whether there was a breach of agreement. Because in her courtroom, feelings matter, but facts decide the case. Then comes a key moment. Judge Judy asks about the payment. How much was paid? what exactly was included, and whether there was any kind of contract or written agreement. Because once money is involved, everything changes. Now it's not just about disappointment. It's about whether someone failed to deliver what they were paid for. The woman answers confidently. She believes she has a strong case. But the midwife, she's not backing down either. She stands firm, ready to explain her side in detail. And you can feel it. This case is just getting started. Because what seemed like a simple complaint is quickly turning into a deeper question about responsibility, communication, and professional boundaries. And as both sides prepare to dig deeper into the details, one thing becomes very clear. This isn't just about what happened that day. It's about what each of them believed was supposed to happen. And somewhere between those two versions lies the truth that it starts to become clear. That this case isn't just about whether the midwife showed up or not. It's about what both sides believe they were agreeing to from the very beginning. Judge Judy leans forward slightly, her tone sharpening, because now she's zeroing in on something critical: communication. She asks a simple but powerful question. When did you go into labor, and when did you contact her? The woman answers immediately. She remembers every detail: the timing, the calls, the messages. Because for her, this wasn't just another day. This was the moment everything she had prepared for suddenly became real. She explains that as soon as she realized labor had begun, she reached out to the midwife multiple times: calls, texts, anything she could do to get a response. But according to her, there was silence. No answer, no reassurance, no guidance, just silence. And as she describes that moment, you can almost feel the anxiety she went through. Because being in labor is already overwhelming. But not knowing if your support system is coming, that takes it to another level. Judge Judy nods slightly, then turns to the midwife. Now it's her turn to explain. And this is where things start to get complicated. The midwife doesn't deny that there was a delay in communication, but she pushes back on the idea that she completely ignored the situation. She claims she was either unavailable at that exact moment or dealing with other responsibilities, and that she did respond, just not in the way the woman expected. That explanation doesn't sit comfortably in the courtroom, because this isn't just any job. This is a profession where timing is everything. Judge Judy immediately picks up on that. Her voice becomes firmer as she asks, "Were you on call for her?" That question changes the entire direction of the case. Because if the midwife was officially on call, then not responding could be seen as a serious failure. But if she wasn't clearly obligated to be available at all times, then things get a little more complicated. The midwife hesitates for just a moment, and that hesitation doesn't go unnoticed. She explains that while she was involved in the pregnancy, there were limits to her availability. She suggests that she never guaranteed she would be physically present at the exact moment labor started. And that's when Judge Judy steps in again. Because now we're getting to the heart of the issue: expectations versus reality. The woman immediately reacts to that statement. You can see the frustration on her face. Because from her perspective, that's not what she signed up for at all. She insists that the entire reason she hired a midwife was for that exact moment: labor and delivery. That was the whole point. Otherwise, what was she paying for? And that question hangs in the air. Because it's a fair question, Judge Judy looks back at the midwife, waiting for a clear answer. What exactly was included in the service? Was it prenatal care only? Was it emotional support? Or was it full involvement, including the birth itself? The midwife tries to explain that her role included guidance, checkups, and general support throughout the pregnancy. But when it comes to the actual delivery, there were variables involved. That word, variables, immediately catches Judge Judy's attention. Because in her courtroom, vague answers don't work. She presses harder. What variables? Be specific. Now the pressure is on. The midwife explains that sometimes labor happens unexpectedly. Sometimes timing doesn't align. And sometimes there are logistical challenges that make it difficult to be physically present. But as she speaks, you can sense that Judge Judy isn't entirely convinced. Because here's the thing: when someone hires a professional for something this important, "Maybe I'll be there" isn't usually acceptable. And that's exactly what Judge Judy is thinking. She turns back to the woman and asks another crucial question. "Did you have a backup plan?" The woman shakes her head. Because in her mind, she didn't need one. She trusted the midwife completely. And that trust is what makes this situation feel even worse. Judge Judy pauses for a moment, taking everything in. Because now she's not just looking at what happened. She's analyzing the decisions made by both sides. On one hand, you have a client who placed full trust in a professional without securing a backup plan. On the other hand, you have a professional who may not have clearly communicated her limitations. And when those two things collide, this is what happens: a breakdown, a failure of expectations, a situation where both sides feel wronged. But Judge Judy isn't here to sympathize. She's here to determine responsibility. So she shifts the focus again. Now she wants to talk about the money. Because at the end of the day, this is a lawsuit. The woman is asking for compensation. She believes she paid for a service that was not delivered, and she wants that money back, possibly more. Judge Judy asks for the exact amount, and when the number is revealed, it adds another layer to the case. Because now it's not just emotional, it's financial. The midwife, however, doesn't agree that a refund is justified. She argues that she provided services throughout the pregnancy: consultations, advice, support, things that still hold value. From her perspective, the payment wasn't just for the day of delivery. It was for the entire journey. And that creates another conflict. Because now the question becomes, how do you measure value in a situation like this? Is the entire service invalidated because of one critical failure? Or does the work done beforehand still count? Judge Judy listens carefully, but you can tell she's starting to form an opinion. She doesn't like unclear agreements. She doesn't like assumptions. And most of all, she doesn't like when people pay for something without fully understanding what they're getting. Then comes a moment that shifts the tone again. Judge Judy asks if there was any written agreement, a contract, something on paper, because that changes everything. The woman says yes, there was some form of agreement, but whether it clearly stated the midwife's obligations, that's another question. And now, that document becomes the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. Because whatever is written there will determine who is responsible. The midwife seems slightly uneasy. The woman looks confident. And Judge Judy is ready to examine the details. Because this is where cases are won or lost. Not in emotions, not in assumptions, but in what was actually agreed upon. As the courtroom prepares to look at the agreement, the tension rises again. Because both sides know whatever is written there could change everything. Now things take a turn that neither side can fully control. Because once paperwork enters the picture, opinions stop matching as much as facts. Judge Judy asks for the agreement, and the energy in the room shifts instantly. The woman hands it over with confidence, almost like she's been waiting for this exact moment. To her, this document is proof. Proof that she didn't imagine anything. Proof that her expectations weren't unreasonable, and most importantly, proof that the midwife failed her. On the other side, the midwife watches carefully. There's a slight tension in her posture now, because once something is written down, there's very little room left for interpretation. Judge Judy begins reading, and when she reads, she doesn't rush. She goes line by line, scanning every detail, every phrase, every word that might reveal what was actually promised. The courtroom goes quiet, because everyone knows. This is the moment where things start becoming real. After a few seconds, Judge Judy looks up, not with a final decision, but with a question. And her questions are never random. They're precise, targeted, designed to uncover exactly what's missing. She looks at the midwife first. Where in this agreement does it say you are not required to be present during labor? That question hits hard, because if that limitation isn't clearly written, then it becomes a problem. The midwife tries to respond, explaining that her role was understood, that these things are often discussed verbally, that not everything is written in black and white. But Judge Judy interrupts. Because understood is not good enough in a legal situation. If something is important, it needs to be clearly stated. Otherwise, people are left to assume, and assumptions are where disputes are born. The woman quickly adds her side, saying that at no point was she told the midwife might not show up. The woman quickly adds her side, saying that at no point was she told the midwife might not show up. In fact, she insists the opposite was implied, that the midwife would be there when it mattered most. Judge Judy nods slightly, then looks back down at the agreement. She flips a page, and then another, and suddenly, there's a shift in her expression. It's subtle, but noticeable, because she's found something. She reads a section out loud, slowly and clearly, making sure both sides hear every word. It outlines the services provided during pregnancy, consultations, guidance, preparation, all the things the midwife mentioned earlier. But when it comes to the actual delivery, the wording becomes less specific, not completely absent, but not clearly defined either. And that ambiguity changes everything. Judge Judy leans back slightly, thinking, because now she's dealing with something more complicated than a simple yes or no situation. This isn't a case where one side is clearly right and the other is clearly wrong. This is a case where both sides might have interpreted the same agreement in completely different ways. And that's where things get tricky. She looks at the woman. You assumed she would be there. Then she looks at the midwife. And you assumed she understood your limitations. That sentence alone summarizes the entire conflict. Two assumptions, no clarity, and a situation that spiraled out of control because of it. But Judge Judy isn't done. Because even if the agreement is unclear, the behavior still matters. She shifts focus again. Now she wants to know exactly what happened on the day of the labor. Not just in general terms, but minute by minute. Because sometimes, the truth is hidden in the details. She asks the woman to walk through the timeline again. This time, more slowly, more precisely. When did labor start? When was the first call made? How many attempts were there? And how long did she wait before making other arrangements? The woman answers carefully, trying to be as accurate as possible. She describes the panic building with each unanswered call, the growing realization that she might be alone in a situation where she expected support. Judge Judy listens, then turns to the midwife. Your turn. And now the pressure is fully on. Because it's one thing to speak generally. It's another to match a detailed timeline. The midwife begins explaining her side. She says she was occupied, possibly attending to another client or dealing with a situation that prevented her from responding immediately. But Judge Judy doesn't let her stay vague. What exactly were you doing? That question forces specificity. And specificity is where inconsistencies often appear. The midwife gives an answer, but there's a slight hesitation again. Not a complete breakdown, not an obvious lie, but just enough uncertainty to raise questions. Judge Judy notices. She always notices. Because in her courtroom, confidence matters. But consistency matters more. She asks another question. Did you call her back? The midwife says yes. Eventually. But eventually is not a strong answer in a situation like this. Because when someone is in labor, time is everything. Judge Judy leans forward again, her tone sharper now. How long is eventually? And suddenly, the gap becomes clear. There was a delay, a significant one, and that delay might be the key to the entire case. Because even if the agreement wasn't perfectly clear, a professional still has a responsibility to respond in a timely manner, especially in a situation this critical. The woman reacts immediately, pointing out that by the time the midwife responded, it was already too late. She had already been forced to move forward without her. And that's when Judge Judy raises her hand slightly, signaling both sides to pause. Because now she's thinking, not just about what happened, but about what was reasonable. What should a client expect? What should a professional guarantee? And where is the line between miscommunication and negligence? The room is quiet again, because everyone can feel it. The case is reaching a turning point. Judge Judy looks down at her notes, then back at both parties. And you can tell, she's starting to connect the dots. Because this isn't just about a missed call anymore. It's about whether that missed call, and everything around it, crosses the line into liability. And as she prepares to ask the next set of questions, one thing becomes clear. Someone's version of events is about to fall apart. What happens next is the moment both sides have been unknowingly building toward. Because once Judge Judy starts seeing cracks in a story, she doesn't just point them out. She pulls on them until the whole thing either holds together or completely falls apart. She looks directly at the midwife again, this time with a sharper, more focused expression, the kind that usually means she's already spotted something that doesn't quite add up. You said you were unavailable, she begins, calm but firm. But unavailable doesn't mean unreachable, especially in your line of work. That statement lands heavily, because now the conversation isn't just about whether she showed up. It's about whether she acted like a responsible professional when it mattered most. The midwife tries to defend herself again, explaining that her job involves multiple clients, unpredictable schedules, and situations that can overlap. She suggests that it's not always possible to drop everything instantly. But Judge Judy doesn't let that explanation go unchallenged. Then why take on the responsibility? She asks. And just like that, the entire argument shifts. Because that question goes deeper than the situation itself. It challenges the decision-making behind it. If you know your availability is limited, why allow someone to depend on you so heavily? The midwife pauses, and that pause speaks louder than anything she's said so far. Because now it's not just about what happened. It's about what should have been anticipated. The woman, sensing the shift, leans into her argument. She explains again how she trusted the midwife completely, how she believed she would be there, and how that belief influenced every decision she made leading up to the delivery. She didn't look for backups. She didn't prepare for alternatives, because she didn't think she needed to. And that's what makes this situation feel so one-sided from her perspective. Judge Judy listens, but she's not fully siding with anyone yet. Because even though the midwife's behavior is being questioned, the woman's choices are also under scrutiny. You put all your eggs in one basket, Judge Judy says plainly. It's not criticism, it's observation. Because trust is important, but blind trust can be risky. And in situations as unpredictable as childbirth, having a backup isn't just smart, it's necessary. But that doesn't completely absolve the midwife either. Because professionals are expected to manage those risks, not pass them on to their clients. Judge Judy turns back to the timeline again. She goes over the delay one more time, making sure there's no confusion. Calls were made. No response. Time passed. Still no response. And by the time the midwife did respond, the situation had already moved forward without her. That sequence is critical because it shows not just absence, but lack of timely action. And in a profession like this, timing isn't optional. It's essential. The midwife tries one last time to justify the delay, suggesting that she believed the situation wasn't urgent at first, or that she didn't realize how quickly things were progressing. But that explanation raises even more questions. Because if you're responsible for supporting someone during labor, how do you misjudge urgency? Judge Judy catches that immediately. You didn't think labor was urgent? She asks, with a hint of disbelief. And that's the moment where the midwife's argument starts to weaken. Because now it's not just about availability. It's about judgment. And poor judgment, in a professional setting, carries consequences. The courtroom energy shifts again. You can feel that the balance is starting to tilt. But Judge Judy still isn't done. Because there's one more layer she wants to address. The money. She goes back to the payment, breaking it down clearly. What portion of the service was actually delivered? What portion was not? And what would be considered fair under those circumstances? The midwife insists again that her prenatal services still hold value, that she spent time, effort, and expertise guiding the woman through her pregnancy. And that's true. But the woman argues that the most critical part of the service, the actual delivery, was missed. And without that, everything else feels incomplete. Judge Judy considers both sides carefully. Because this isn't just about refunding money. It's about determining value. And value, in this case, isn't evenly distributed. Some parts of the service matter more than others. And when the most important part fails, it affects everything else. She leans back slightly, looking at both of them. And for a moment, she says nothing. That silence is powerful, because it means she's reached the point where everything has been said. And now it's about judgment. The woman watches closely, hopeful. The midwife waits, tense but composed. And then, Judge Judy begins to speak. Her tone is calm, but decisive. She explains that this case comes down to two key issues: clarity and responsibility. On one hand, the agreement was not as clear as it should have been. That created room for misunderstanding. But on the other hand, the midwife, as the professional, had a greater responsibility to ensure that expectations were clearly communicated, and more importantly, to respond appropriately in a critical moment. The delay in communication, the lack of immediate response, and the absence during the most important phase, all of these factors matter a lot. Because when someone hires you for something this significant, being eventually available is not enough. You either show up, or you make it absolutely clear that you might not. There's no middle ground. The woman's decision to rely entirely on one person may not have been the safest choice, but it was based on the belief that she was hiring someone dependable, and that belief wasn't unreasonable. Judge Judy pauses again, and now you can feel it. The decision is about to be delivered. Finally, The moment everyone has been waiting for arrives. Because in Judge Judy's courtroom, once she's made up her mind, there's no hesitation, no dragging things out. Just a clear, direct decision. She looks at both of them one last time, making sure they understand that what she's about to say isn't based on emotion. It's based on responsibility. And then she begins. She explains that while both sides contributed to the confusion in this situation, the greater burden falls on the professional. Because when you offer a service, especially one as serious and time-sensitive as this, it's your job to eliminate doubt, not create it. She makes it clear that the agreement should have been more precise. If the midwife had limitations, if there were chances she might not be available, if there were conditions under which she wouldn't be present, all of that should have been stated clearly in writing, without leaving anything open to interpretation. Because when something as important as childbirth is involved, assumptions are dangerous. But then Judge Judy shifts her focus to what actually happened on the day of the labor. And this is where her tone becomes even firmer. She points out that regardless of how the agreement was written, there was still an expectation of basic professional conduct. And that includes responding promptly, especially in a situation where timing is critical. The delay in communication, the lack of immediate response, and the failure to provide reassurance or guidance in that moment. All of that reflects poorly on the midwife's responsibility. She emphasizes that even if the midwife couldn't physically be there right away, a simple response could have made a difference. A call back, instructions, something. But instead, there was silence. And in a moment where someone is vulnerable, scared, and relying on you, silence is not acceptable. The woman listens closely, and you can see a sense of validation starting to appear. Because for her, this isn't just about winning. It's about being heard. The midwife, on the other hand, stands quietly, because at this point, she knows which direction this is going. Judge Judy continues. She acknowledges that the midwife did provide some services during the pregnancy. Consultations, guidance, support. Those things have value, and she's not ignoring that. But then she makes a critical distinction. She says that not all parts of a service carry equal weight. And in this case, the most important part, the actual labor and delivery, was where the failure occurred. And when the most critical component of a service is not delivered, it undermines the value of everything else. That statement changes everything. Because now the focus isn't just on what was done, it's on what wasn't. Judge Judy looks directly at the midwife. And with complete clarity, she explains that taking on a responsibility like this means being prepared for the unpredictable. It means understanding that your client is depending on you during one of the most important moments of their life. And if you're not able to meet that expectation, then you need to be upfront about it from the very beginning. Not after the fact, not when things go wrong, but before any agreement is made. Because once someone places their trust in you, you don't get to redefine your role later. And that's where the midwife fell short. There's a brief pause. And then, the judgment. Judge Judy rules in favor of the woman. She orders that a significant portion of the money be returned, recognizing that while some services were provided, the failure to be present and responsive during labor cannot be overlooked. The exact amount reflects that balance. Not a full dismissal of the midwife's work, but a clear acknowledgement that the most important obligation was not fulfilled. The woman exhales slightly, a mix of relief and closure. The midwife nods, accepting the decision, even if she doesn't fully agree with it. And just like that, the case is over. But what makes this case stick with you isn't just the legal outcome. It's the lesson behind it. Because this situation could have been avoided. Clear communication, defined expectations, backup plans. All of these things might have changed the outcome completely. Instead, what happened here is something we see far too often. Two people entering an agreement with different assumptions, and only realizing it when it's already too late. And in situations like this, the consequences are more than just financial. They're emotional. They're personal. They stay with you. Because moments like childbirth don't come with a second chance. You don't get a redo. You don't get to go back and fix what went wrong. You only get one experience. And when that experience is affected by something like this, it leaves a lasting impact. And that's what makes this case so powerful. Not just because of the decision, but because of what it teaches. Before you trust someone with something important, make sure everything is clear. Before you rely completely on one person, have a backup. And if you're the one being trusted, understand the weight of that responsibility. Because when expectations and reality don't match, this is what happens. Now here's something to think about. Do you believe the midwife was truly at fault? Or was this just a case of miscommunication from both sides? Should the woman have had a backup plan? Or was it reasonable for her to fully trust the person she hired? And if you were in that situation, would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. Because cases like this don't always have simple answers, and your opinion might just change how someone else sees it.